Let's dive right in because we're on a bit of a condensed schedule tonight. We're going to be talking about a lot of stuff. Our first panel this evening is about expansion strategies for craft brewers. We got three of the brightest minds in the business. Starting to my left, Nico Freccia from 21st Amendment, Hayes Humphreys from Devil's Backbone, and David Walker from Firestone. Walker, round of applause for these guys. So what's unique is that all of them have a bit of a different story when it comes to expansion. For David, it's been sort of slow and steady over the last 15, 20 years until, just last year, a $15 million expansion announcement. For Hayes at Devil's Backbone, sort of an interesting situation, having to go out and take a big leap to go from, 60,000 barrels all the way to eventually 300,000.
Correct.
And needed to go raise the financing for that, and obviously it ended up turning into a deal with Anheuser-Busch, and we'll get to that a little bit later. And for Nico, going the contract route, building up a brand in somebody else's facility, and then pulling it back to brick and mortar, so a totally unique challenge there. And we're going to dive right on in. So, Hayes, I'll start with you. Let's kind of go down the line here, catch up on business. What's the latest with Devil's Backbone? How's the capacity situation? I know you went from 60,000 to about 150 now, right? And what was that, 12 million that you spent for that?
Yeah, so we completed an expansion from 60,000 barrels. We were maxed out at our production facility, and last June we installed a 120 barrel brew house and some fermentation capacity and some more along the way, and we're currently at about 150,000 barrel potential on site and expandable up to 300,000. The interesting thing about that expansion, for 4 years, we've been trying to keep up, right? Our whole story has been stocking out, and we have never been able to make enough beer. So we overinvested, we oversized it, and we finally solved that problem. We fixed that bottleneck. And then it's funny how many other bottlenecks you find further down the line once you clear the one hurdle. And that's kind of where we are now.
Right. And as you were beginning sort of the first stages of planning that big expansion, what were the key areas that you considered prior to determining how big to go? And I'm thinking in terms of organizational support that you would need, new distribution. What were sort of the primary areas of consideration for Devil's Backbone?
So I think to kind of size the system, we did some market sizing. We had established we thought a 500-mile radius from the brewery was, a reasonable regional range in which we'd be relevant. We tried to, throw some darts at a dartboard and figure out how much beer we thought we could sell in that footprint. It also had, it had to do with how much physical space we had at our site and that sort of thing. And so that kind of gave us a sense of the scale that we needed to physically expand. And then the physical expansion leads to a lot of kind of organizational issues, and how do you kind of rejigger the org chart to make sure that you can accommodate all this growth. With new beer come new markets, so you need a bigger sales team, you need a bigger marketing department. We had spent the first 3 to 4 years really trying to get our brewing team and our brewing processes and our sales team and our sales processes into a place where they could expand rapidly, and you could kind of repeat the same as we grew bigger. And what we hadn't really invested in was kind of the back-end admin support, office folks essentially. And so as we finally crossed this threshold, that was the big area, was trying to figure out what were our needs there, and we brought on a lot more people to help kind of support all that growth in-house.
Right. For you, David, what are sort of the key differences between your experience and Hayes' experience? I mean, you kind of grew little by little until you got to the point where, it was time to take off a bigger bite. What's been your experience growing over the years?
Yeah, in some ways it was different. In some ways it was very similar. I mean, we took us 15 years to get to 50,000 barrels. So the next 5 years, 6 years, this year we'll hit 350,000 barrels. So the curve is just as aggressive. One could say we had 15 years of practice prior to that, which maybe gave us a little bit more of an advantage. But you really can't prepare yourself for that type of growth and the decisions that you have to make in order to get through it. So yeah, no, I mean I like to say fairly similar curves.
Right. What did you guys struggle with the most over the years?
Just about everything. We struggled with absolutely everything. It was I know there's a ton of guys who've been in this world for 20 years, but 20 years ago, this was a complex riddle. You opened your brewery, and you pulled together some equipment, and you were sort of full of piss and vinegar, and you were a artisan and an entrepreneur, and then you walked out into the great wide world and realized that everyone was everything was set against you. There was a bunch of rules and regulations that just astounded me as a free citizen of the world, and just figuring those out was extraordinary. But once we sort of unfumbled the riddle and worked out where we were going, we slowly put the thing together. We've had a great 20 years. Some of our brethren who started the same time as us have been incredibly successful. I mean, they've really soared, and they figured out different seams, and were obviously smarter than us at different points. But no, it's been a worthy struggle. It's been fun.
And Nico, the struggle's been a little bit different for you, having to completely, figure out how to actually run a brewery, growing a brand out of somebody else's space, and then deciding, hey, let's go brick and mortar. What was the biggest thing that you guys sort of grappled with as you built out that space in San Leandro? And, I guess what was sort of the biggest advantage to kind of going the opposite way, having, so much demand for your product already built up in advance of building your first facility?
Yeah, I think we're a really interesting and probably unique situation in that we built a 300,000 barrel capacity bricks and mortar brewery from the ground up without having any legacy staff, without having, we didn't have a staff of brewers, we didn't have a single engineer, we didn't have the, really the know-how, we didn't have the knowledge. We weren't doing, like Firestone, kind of growing organically and adding to our facility and taking over the next space, which I think a lot of people in this business do. So, and that was certainly our biggest challenge. It was a massive learning curve. We relied on a number of the best minds in the industry as far as consultants. We had 3 different consultants at one point who come from amazing provenance in the industry. One particularly that helped us with packaging, one particularly that helped us with brewing. But sometimes I, marvel that we were able to get this done. And, when we built the brewery, we had this beautiful new Ferrari and nobody to drive it, really. So, we had to hire, find the right skilled people, which is tough because it's a competitive market. But over time, we also, with Brewing in Cold Spring, our contract partner allowed us a lot of flexibility. We were already making beer there and bringing it back to California, as well as to the East Coast. So we were able to continue to do that while we're building, and then sort of start slowly pulling it away out of San Leandro bit by bit, which allowed us to, hire brewers, hire cellar people, hire engineers, one at a time, get them up and running, try out new package sizes, and sort of get our feet wet before we really jumped in. And now a year later, we're finally bringing the rest of the tanks that we dropped in over a year ago online. We haven't been using them, but we're using them now, and this summer we'll sort of ramp up to capacity.
So, if you had to do it all over again, would you do it the same way, or would you, kind of flip the script and go brick and mortar first? Aside from the brew pub, I know that you have down there from the stadium.
When we started shipping beer in 2008, we were really among the first, certainly on the West Coast, to do beer in cans. That was supposed to be our unique market niche. We didn't know whether they would sell. We didn't know whether anybody was going to ever buy cans. We just kind of thought it gave us a unique positioning, and also we liked cans for their quality and portability and all that good stuff.
Well, nobody's packaging in cans now, so.
Right. So it was a big failure. No, I mean, I don't think, and we also didn't have the inclination, the money, or really the appetite to try to find the debt to build a brewery at that time. I mean, until we started this project a couple of years ago, we were debt-free as a company, and we were shipping 60,000 barrels a year. which was a good feeling, and ideally we probably would have wanted to build up a little more cash before we jumped into this. And in retrospect, we spent too much money. Imagine that, on building a brewery. And we probably could have done it cheaper by putting a smaller system in initially, but the trade-up is we got a lot of runway now.
Right. So when you come out the other side of an expansion, and this is kind of the area that I really wanted to focus most of this discussion on, is the decisions that you need to make around construction. It's not just putting tanks in the ground. It's not just walking the expo hall and picking out a brew house or something like that. It's really the business planning that goes around it. You said hiring a talented brewing team, hiring the business people to actually manage things for Hayes. David, I'm sure you're probably going through some of this with the expansion forthcoming, figuring out what the next steps are. What are the biggest challenges that you guys have, knowing that you've taken a big leap or you've changed your business model significantly and you come out the other side? What are the key areas that you focus on? Is it a distribution strategy? Is it a go-to-market strategy? I mean, what are the things that change as you alter your business entirely? And I'll start with Hayes, because he's staring at me.
Awesome. I won't look at you anymore.
You're giving me that deep look, staring right into my soul.
Hey, buddy. I think one challenge is definitely, you make an expansion decision like that with a long-term plan in mind. So you think about, we talked about, we did market sizing, we figured out, we thought over a certain period of time we could fill out that footprint, and then you put all the capacity in and you have to stick to the plan even though it feels like maybe you can do a lot more and you've taken out a lot of debt and you want to get the money back, and so committing yourself to sticking to the plan that seemed like a good idea when you started out and put all the effort into it is definitely, it takes discipline. We at Devil's Backbone are not the most disciplined people in the world, but we installed the system last year. We had some expansion markets last year, and we knew going into this year that it was going to be, we were going to freeze for a year and let everything play out and see, what happened. It was, our footprint's a little interesting. We sell a huge percentage of our beer in Virginia, so we put this gigantic expansion in on the assumption that we could translate outside of Virginia, but we hadn't really gone very far afield. We sold all our beer in Virginia, Maryland, and DC. So to open North Carolina and open Tennessee were real tests for us, and we committed this year to just taking the year to figure out what it was going to take to be relevant outside of our state borders. Otherwise, if we can't figure it out, the whole expansion was kind of for naught.
Right, and you guys had another unique challenge in that you built out the actual brewing side without necessarily considering sort of the packaging or storage side as well.
Yeah,
and so there's some logistical challenges. Did that kind of force you into the situation of having to look for a strategic partner or another outside investor?
Yeah, I think when you talk about financing this stuff, we've always been very stingy with equity, right? Because you only get 100% of it, period. And when you start giving it away and you bring other people in, it changes the business and it's hard to get back. So we really didn't want to adjust, kind of the makeup of the ownership of the company. So we were able to get debt financing for the expansion, but we definitely maxed it out and we didn't have a lot of flexibility left. The chunks that you need, the chunks of dollars that you need to expand, in these big expansions, they're expensive. It's big dollar values, and it's a long time until you start getting the dollars back in, and you start generating the kind of profitability that you need to either get more money from the bank or find yourself some financial flexibility. So as we started to figure out that there was more we needed to do, we went back to the banks to see if we could get anything else done, and we were pretty much maxed out. And so at that point, we realized that we were going to have to adjust the ownership of the company somehow.
Right. David, how were you able to get to the point of 150,000 barrels or so before you as a company decided that it was time to look for a partner like Duvel?
Well, it was a slow realization. Our first brew house cost 24 grand. Our second was $1.5 million. Our third was about $4.5 million. The This new one coming online is going to be about 15, and that's just the brew house. I mean, we got probably another 15, not probably, we got another 15 following after that with coal block and wastewater, another 15 following after that with our bottling plant. And if you walked onto our brewery today with none of those improvements, you'd go, man, this is a huge brewery. Things maxed out. It's too small. So there is this sort of sense that you got a giant monster in your trousers. I mean, this thing is like all encompassing.
I never got that sense.
And it's a great. It's in some ways it's hugely satisfying. I mean, the greatest satisfaction I get out of.
You're digging it deeper, David.
All right, sorry. You told me to liven the crowd up. It's just sort of walking around a brewery that's gone from sort of a notion to something of scale. It really is. I mean, it's amazingly satisfying. But the thing will continue to exponentially increase, and so that's something that really begins to weigh on you and sort of work out. Okay, so you start looking at your lifespan both as a brewery or as an individual and your partners and your employees, and you say, okay, how do we get through the next 20, 30, 40 years? We've been in this for 20 years, and I'm amazed we made it through the first year, and here we are now at the second decade. So this thing's got some legs. How do we propel this thing forward another 20, 30, 40 years? And just sort of building that realization and sort of working on a platform that can get you there, that obviously sort of led us to where we are today. So.
Right. Is there a point at which every brewery sort of figures out that they, can't necessarily do it all on their own? That they're gonna need help from somebody else, whether it's a strategic partner or a private equity firm, in order to take that next big step? Or can breweries continue to expand, and do it themselves?
Yeah, I think it really all depends on the individuals. I mean, this is not a homogenous group of people here. Everybody's got their own goals. They've got their own individual, personal direction and pressures and so forth. So it really depends on the individual. I think there's some people are happy to keep loading up on debt or keep rolling the dice. Others would like to trade off a little debt for a little peace of mind. Some people don't want to be in the beer business anymore. It's already taken a huge chunk of their life. They want out. They want to do something else. Some people want to remain in it, but without having to feel like they're on the hook to the bank manager every quarter. So, I mean, like I said, it really is. It depends on the individuals, and you're beginning to see that play out here within our small community of brewers as they hit these marks. And all of a sudden, you can go out and find a couple of $1 million. You can maybe find $4 or $5 million, but when you're looking to add $40, $50, $60 million notes to your life, that's difficult. And as brewers, and we all know this, I mean, we make profit, and 30-40% of it goes to the government, and then 30-40% maybe goes to just funding cash flow and growth, and you're left with a little bit here, and it's like, okay, so what can I do with that? Well, I'm going to go fix something. I mean, you're not going to go build something. It's an interesting conundrum. It's a classic capital-intensive enterprise.
Right. Nico, how about for 21st Amendment? How did you guys approach the financing for your big brewery? And are you happy with the approach that you took? And as you look out into the future for your company, do you ever see 21st Amendment getting to a point where you'll need to kind of revisit how you approach the next phase of your brewery life cycle?
I mean, the latter part of that question is an ongoing question. To address the first part, fortunately, we are in a time, this brewery golden age has probably been driven largely because interest rates have been low for so long. So, banks will loan money at cheap rates. Stainless steel is high in value and appreciating and holding its value. And so we had no problem with, with bringing on a bank to finance our assets. But it's purely asset-based financing. And what you learn pretty quickly is, you have to dig in the ground, for instance, in California, to put in a lot of seismic reinforcement. They won't cover any of that stuff. You have to put, metal rebar up in the roof of your building to reinforce it. They won't cover that stuff. So that, for us, quickly became several $1 million. I mean, we've got a cellar floor with 36 inches of concrete with these, 4-inch thick stainless steel embeds for each leg of each tank that are each embedded with 36-inch threaded rods in the concrete. And I mean, we've got 10 tanks in there, and it's something like $2 million in the floor. So that's challenging, because that's when you get out over your skis. And I think, one of the big challenges in growth is when you start down the path, at a certain point, there's no turning back. And at that point, your decisions about how you run your business start being dictated by something other than how you might want to run your business. Right. In other words, we were lucky enough to be able to, basically grow the way we wanted to grow, the way we chose to grow. We went into new markets when we wanted to and could support them. And then you can turn a corner where all of a sudden you're going into new markets because you have to meet numbers, because you have to pay the bank. Right. And that's not really a great position to get yourself in. The good news is you can get out of it by continuing to grow and paying down some debt. But expansion will, change, I think, how you suddenly start making decisions about your business.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems inevitable. If you're putting a bunch of tanks in the ground, you got to move that beer somewhere, and those tanks are going to dictate how and where you move it. We hear weekly now about multi-million-dollar expansions from breweries large and small around the country. What's at risk as just a collective industry as brewers, together as a unit are expanding so ambitiously, and perhaps some of them are going to find themselves in a similar situation where they're letting their expansions drive decisions as opposed to making those decisions the way they want to. What's at risk as an industry if we kind of peel back a layer and look at it from a macro perspective? And I'll toss that to all of you and go down the line.
Well, I mean, this is one of the questions that keeps coming up. Bart Watson, as we know from the BA, did a study that said that the amount of capacity coming online is about in line, right, with the projected growth of the industry. So you certainly, to me, there is no remedy or answer for the industry as a whole. To me, it's about looking down the line for us, where we're strong in what markets, what our growth is, how we think we can keep nurturing that growth and expanding at a reasonable amount in those markets, where we've still got open territory and opportunity. And so we kind of plan based on that. Right. There will be some that probably invest too much and, as you say, get out over their skis. Yeah.
Hayes, for you, did the decision or the upcoming decision, knowing that you had an expansion to embark on, did that drive your distribution expansions? And if so, why did you approach it that way? How should people consider that element of it if they're either about to expand or have expanded?
So we had no capacity to expand. So if we wanted to open any new markets, we had to, increase the size of the brewery. I think there's really there's not really easy volume out there anymore. I mean, there's so many breweries out there, and it's you have to work really hard to be relevant and build a brand, in a new market, and so you have to be diligent about it. There are definitely breweries out there now that are, putting up, volume increases primarily through expansion, and there's, there's finite space. There's either 50 states or 186 countries or however many there are in the world, and there's only so far you can go if you're not growing organically in the places you've expanded to and you're not figuring out ways to make it work. That's, to me, when it gets really risky. For whatever reason, you really have to be focusing on those markets. You can only make the numbers look good for so long by opening new territory. And so, I mean, we've watched guys struggle to pull back out and come back to their core, and it's hard to undo that decision. So for us, the decision to expand into new markets is something that we always took pretty carefully.
Right. It almost seems like, sort of a vicious cycle. You get to the point where there's demand for your products. You have to put tanks in the ground to, sort of satiate that demand. And, you get to this point where, there's 50 other breweries around you also doing the same thing. And we heard today in a retailer panel where the retailer said, one of the retailers said, I got pale ales and wheat beers and lagers in Texas, and I don't need the guys from the West Coast bringing those types of styles to where I'm at. I got 100 guys doing that in Texas. And, there's competing forces. You have that happening. There is this, there are some brands going national. There are some regional brewers kind of expanding their footprints. How much of that do you think is being driven by the fact that they've got beer in tanks and they got to move it, or they've got a thirst for their own growth and they feel they can capitalize on it, but they're not really adding anything of differentiation. They're not having a product in the market that's different than what a retailer can get locally.
I think obviously, I believe there's a lot of runway for craft beer. I believe that as long as craft beer is high quality, authentic, there's a story wrapped behind it, it's got integrity, you can touch and feel the players, it will always be relevant. And in some ways, all of this heavy lifting that you have to do to grow is sort of a barrier to someone sort of pulling a mask over this whole thing and hijacking it. The big brewers have tried to do that, and they've not succeeded. So I think the very sort of cluttered, confused complexity of craft is one of its great strengths, and I think it somewhat throws a barrier around what craft beer is, and it sort of helps us all. Sort of be who we want to be, without someone just coming in and pretending to be us. Now, without question, people can do that, but it doesn't last very long, not in this world, not today. So, in some ways, I've said this before, I'm a proponent of more breweries. I know it's crazy and it's confusing. Our roots were in the wine industry, and there's 11,000 winemakers out there, and there's more, and that's doubled since 1995, and the wine revolution's been going since the 70s. So, and brewers are not constrained by climate. Okay, they're constrained by freshness, but there's a lot more breweries coming online. But I think that sort of confusion will, in a weird, screwed up sort of way, insulate us from just getting snuffed out. So, to answer your question, am I relevant in Texas? I'm probably not. I mean, I'm relevant to some people in Texas, but I'm sure a brewery in Texas is far more relevant to its neighbors. Am I relevant in California? Yeah, absolutely, I am. And there's a lot of people there, and there's a lot of people drinking light lagers, and they've all got a target on their back. There's plenty of opportunity. I see that.
Right. Well, I guess we'll kind of shift back to some of the strategic decisions that you guys think about as you're expanding. What else is on the table? We talked a little bit about distribution. What else is on the table when you are going out raising capital to expand? Is it, do you take a look at your packaging mix and say, okay, maybe this is the time to add cans, or, for Nico, maybe it's, do we want to explore bottles? Do you look at the branding itself and say, okay, if we're going to be investing all this money, maybe it's time to retool the branding? What's on the table outside of just putting tanks in the ground and thinking about distribution?
Well, for us, we were relatively limited in what we could do with a brand spread in our brewery in Cold Spring, Minnesota. So we had the opportunity to start doing some new brands and new package sizes. We went into variety packs, 12 packs, and even some 24s. So also barrel program is something we're starting that we've never been able to really do before. So, part of expansion, sure, is put in a distillery, put in a barrel program, be able to do variety packs, which are hot. For me, one of the big challenges I think right now is sales, focus, and team. With a lot of breweries our size getting injections of capital from partners, they got feet on the street.
Yep.
And we spent too much money building this brewery, so we're in austerity mode, and nobody gets to spend a dime on anything. If you come to our tasting room in San Leandro at our new brewery, we don't even have bathrooms. You have to use a porta potty. And we opened a year ago because, when we put the plumbing in the ground, but we decided, well, we can't spend the $200,000 to build the walls and put the fixtures in. But we have a tasting room, and it runs, and you have to use a porta potty. But that's changing. We've just bought a bathroom trailer, and that'll be parked outside, so you'll be able to use a real bathroom. But things like that, and you start seeing out in the market. Well, shoot, we're trying to grow our presence in Southern California, for instance. We can't cover that territory with 2 people, And then meanwhile, you've got other brands that have literally a small army. You might have 10 people in that market. So I think really thinking about how you're going to expand your sales and marketing capabilities with your brewery expansion, to me, probably is one of the biggest challenges.
Right, and the bank isn't going to finance that, though, because they're only financing the assets. So where do you get the money to hire the people? Well,
the catch-22 is eventually you'll have an enterprise value where the entire value of your company is enough, your bottom line is big enough that they'll sort of give you a blank credit line, and then you can use it for that, but you have to be big enough to do that. So that's really the challenge. And with growth comes using up a lot of cash flow. So if you're growing, you're generating cash flow. That's for operations. You can't afford to pay down construction debt with that kind of money. So it's a slippery slope.
Hayes, how many salespeople do you guys have now?
200? Devil's Backbone Brewing Company has 22 sales reps in 6 states.
And that's just for your local markets there in Virginia and Maryland, basically.
That's 5 states in the district.
Yep. And plans with Anheuser-Busch, now that you have access to their large high-end team, what are your plans to expand distribution for the brand and tap into some of that? Because, that is the advantage that you have. You do have a small army to tap into.
Yeah, I don't know. We don't know. We knew, before 2017 for us was always going to be a year of, quite a bit of expansion. 2016 we knew we were going to stand pat and make sure that the things that we thought were going to work in the other markets were going to work, and then the plan was to take those formulas to, a number of new states. So, the plan was already to be aggressive. The deal hasn't closed. We don't have. There is no new plan at this point. So, it's actually one of the hardest things for us is we're just in limbo right now. We can't, really do anything, which is very hard for us.
Yeah.
We like doing things.
David, do you have a small army at your service to sell Firestone all around the country?
We do. We have a great army. There's about 80 guys on the sales and marketing side now, guys and gals, and we are a potent force.
Before you got there, before you had access to 80 different people to sell the brand, and maybe you have an enterprise value for your company, I'm not sure. How did you get to this point? How were you able to do the things that it seems like Nico has pointed out as a potential pain point for a lot of brewers, and get to where you are to even have the opportunity to hire 80 people?
Well, it took 20 years. It started with a village idiot, and it just sort of, rolled from there. And we slowly but surely added people, and we've added a lot more people in the last couple of years as we've grown. But I don't think that's an excessive amount. I actually think that's what you need to do to keep the business healthy, and especially now. It just seemed like a fairly organic path for us.
All right. Well, I'll give you guys all a final word before we skip off to our next interview with Sam Calagione. A final word of advice for anyone in the audience that might be planning their own expansion, something you wish you would have known before you went into it, something you're still grappling with in your own endeavors to expand, and you can't say, budget more than what you think you're going to spend, because everybody always says that. So something that you wish you would have known, and a word of advice for anyone looking to expand their brewery. And I'll start with Nico.
Really? You start with all those guys every other time?
You've been quiet, and you're the closest to me.
All right. I mean, my mantra has always been that naivete is underrated. Like, we wouldn't have, done what we did if we had known all the pitfalls we had in front of us. So, you got to jump into it, but you'll learn more about finance and debt than, in a short period of time than you ever wanted to know. Just, going back to my earlier comment, I guess I would say the biggest thing is just keep an eye towards managing the financing so that you can still be making the decisions about how you want to grow, and you don't wake up one morning and say, well, I have to expand into 10 new states tomorrow now because otherwise I won't be able to pay the bank next week. You don't want to find yourself in that position.
Hayes?
I think the thing that we didn't realize, we can plug the Brewbound session, right? We went to the Brewbound session in December with you guys, and almost felt like you had set it up for us because you had a slate of speakers talking about managing your growth, right? And how to achieve sustainable growth. We haven't really had sustainable growth, and we didn't really understand the consequences of that, and so it is very expensive to grow. So you either have to start with a lot of money or save a lot of money, or and the only way you save a lot of money is to manage that growth. So, man, it's awesome, opening up that May Brewers Association magazine and seeing how far you jumped up the rankings and how big your increase was. But it's you can do with small increases for a long time and be very healthy and have a great business. If you have a great product and you have, if you have your business figured out, whatever happens in the future, whether you think there's a bubble or not a bubble, you can make it. There's always space for good products, and so we all feel caught up in a race right now, but I don't think we have to be racing, and that would be, I guess, my word.
Patience.
Patience. I mean, it's easy for me to say now, but yeah, I think so, and I think there's a lot of great examples of it around the industry, and a lot of companies that, and I'm not unhappy with the way things have come out at all. I'm actually very excited about what's going on, but I think, if you want to do it, keep your structure the way you are and keep everything in house. You just, I think, have to be a little bit more patient.
Yep. David, word of advice?
Nothing that everybody doesn't already know, but if I had to prioritize the things that I feel are important, that we feel are important, that my partners and the people who work with us, quality is absolutely critical. I mean, if you can't be proud of what you're doing, of what you're making, of what you're talking to people about, if you can't stand behind it, I mean, you're less of a person. I mean, you're always going to be struggling with what you're doing. And I think, and obviously, if when you are proud of something, it's amazing how tall you stand. You're like twice your size. So I think quality, and there's every day you're challenged with ways that you can cut corners in a brewery, especially a craft brewery. So that's the first thing. The second thing is don't poo-poo culture. I mean, obviously, craft is soaked in culture. I mean, the very sort of gathering of the tribe up here shows you there's a lot of culture flying around. But when we get back home into our enterprises, it's very easy to chip away at that, doing this and doing that and not doing this. So valuing that is huge because you need it when you're in these types of businesses. And I like to say we've got 350 people who work for us. Every one of those people could find a better paid job tomorrow. Every one of them. They work with us because they feel culturally satisfied. I mean, it's like they feel it's a good place to be. And the last thing is work. I mean, if you know, if you're not prepared to work your ass off, this is really the wrong place. I mean, it's like being a fisherman and saying you don't want to go to sea. I mean, this is a business that never sleeps. And if you're not brewing beer, you can be selling beer. If you're not selling beer, you can be dreaming about beer. I mean, it's just an endless cycle. So you got to love it. Otherwise, you know, it'll be more difficult. So.
Right. So be patient, work your ass off, and pay attention to the money. Fair enough? All right. Thanks, guys. Big round of applause. Thank you.